Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of What the Haze. I am your host, Hayes Wolfenden, and as you can tell, we are flying solo. I was supposed to have a guest on this weekend, but we had some last minute audio and visual problems that could not be solved, unfortunately. So instead of, taking a break, I thought I'd just have another session with just me and talk about a few things that have been on my mind recently, or to share some updates about my various channels that I'm trying to do. But first of all, I want to kick this off with a huge thank you. Thank you for everybody that's in the various groups I've set up. Thank you for everyone that downloads and streams my podcasts, because I couldn't do it without you, to be honest. There's a lot of work goes into it, I'll be honest. More work than I envisioned, I'll be honest. There's a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. Sometimes it can be little things. If I'm promoting an episode, it might be 30 straight minutes of my time. And I have to find time for that sometime, and I have to kind of rearrange my schedule around. Some people I have to, just messaging can take time. So there's a lot of work that does go into it. So when people do download and stream my work, I'm so appreciative, like I said. I also want to thank all the guests that have come onto my show. You're taking an hour usually out of your time, your lives. And it's fantastic. I really love it. I love talking to you guys about writing and literature and books. Sometimes, the traumatic events in your lives, or the traumatic events that have propelled you to write. Thank you for sharing that with me and, of course, the wider world. I also want to say I'm doing my best at times to help you guys grow as well. I like the idea that, especially if you're a published writer or you've got a publishing company, something like that, and maybe you come onto my show and then somebody tells you, maybe weeks, maybe months down the line, hey, at this time, there was a little blip in your sales stats, and it's because of me. I don't mean that in an egotistical sense. I mean, I want to help. I do think maybe in today's world, there's so many writers out there. The vast majority are unknown. Even those that are published, even those that are making really good money, most people haven't heard of them. Every time I go to a literary agent's page, this is a really good example, and they talk about the latest titles that they've read, or they recommend something like that, or their existing clients, I haven't heard of any of them. Very rarely. That makes it sound like I'm not reading. I read every day. I'm reading all the time. I'm quite an eclectic reader. I do tend to read around a lot. I write I say young adult fiction, but it tends to be young adult dystopian or young adult sci-fi. I tend to flip between the two. And dystopia is really an offshoot of sci-fi in any case. So I tend to, do a lot of stuff like that. But I don't just read that. For me to have ideas and to write about something, I have to, read around quite a bit. And maybe to a certain extent, that leads to me, not knowing enough new contemporary writers. And I'll hold my hand up there. But, it's not cool or sexy these days to say, yeah, I'm influenced by Shakespeare. But in reality, a lot of us probably are, or at least of other writers, I think I'm influenced quite a bit by, say, for example, George Orwell recently, Hemingway, Steinbeck, certainly people like J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, George Martin as well. These are the big influences on my life, and these are the people I read all the time. So if I read a literary agent's page and it says they represent Stephen King, right, get it. I think this is one of the problems, I think, with modern writing, like I was saying, is that in 50 years' time, the unpublished or the indie author and the published author will be the same. And that is forgotten. Books, no, I wouldn't say lost, because these days everything's digitized. There's testimonies and stuff, and there's historical records, but being remembered. And so what I would say to that is, I think if you're a published author, just try to remember that it's not, I think that's the hardest part probably these days of being published. There's lots of people around you going, you're great, you're great, you're great. And listen, don't get me wrong, you might be, but at the end of the day, if your name's not J.K. Rowling, George Martin, or Stephen King, those are three that I think they've crossed generations. People still read them. People still watch TV shows, for example, like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is still being made in different TV shows. Those are the three that always stand out to me. Those are going to last. And then there's others that we can put arguments for. Neil Gaiman might be one. Brandon Sanderson, an American author I read a lot of, might be another. But ultimately, we don't know. It can be hard to predict because we're trying to predict the next generation. One of the craziest things is, William Blake. William Blake was a romantic poet, not just romantic. He was a revolutionary. He didn't really, he believed in God, but didn't believe in like the church per se. He was anti-army, anti-monarchy, and guess what? He was adopted and praised by the Victorians, who were the exact opposite. And that's for me is who's the next William Blake? How do we decide? Which authors we're going to pluck from obscurity and maintain. William Blake will always get remembered. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. So going back to it, I really do, when I'm doing these podcasts, I'm trying to help the writers out there, especially the indie writers, just get that little bit of a leg up. Just that little bit of, hey, look at this guy, or hey, look at this woman. Look at what they're doing. I do think, and I've commented on a few people's Instagram posts about this, I think maybe one of the mistakes at the moment, though I can understand it, literary agents, and to be fair to literary agents, they're really the messengers of the publishing companies. They're looking for the next great idea. And I wonder if that's flawed and we've gone about it the wrong way. I wonder if we should be prioritizing not the idea, but the person who came up with it. And so look at authors more, the kind of authors that maybe can take hints, can take advice, will change. And you know what? Are willing to work with their agent and the publishing company for 10 or 20 years. I do see sometimes maybe some writers, they might even be published too fast. Brandon Sanderson has talked about this, where you get writers. J.K. Rowling's one. I know there's obviously a bit of fame about her that she was rejected so many times. Not really. She got picked up by a literary agent first time. Harry Potter is accepted by a publishing company, albeit a minor one at the time, Bloomsbury. Not very minor now, thanks to Harry Potter. And after it was published in the first round. Yes, 14 other publishing companies might have turned it down, but the 15th didn't. She was published pretty quickly. And I do wonder sometimes if writers like that, they don't quite appreciate what it means to be a writer. It's such a historical privilege. Wow. You get to have, everybody has a voice, but they have a voice with a megaphone attached and they get to put their stories out there. But I think sometimes maybe I've seen a few Instagram posts where people have been published. I can tell they've been published pretty quickly, agents pretty quickly. I do tend to think if you go to a really good university, you are going to know the right people. You get published pretty quickly, but maybe there are some disadvantages to that. Maybe what that means is that you write one or two books and then you don't know what to do. Whereas there's indie authors out there. I'm one of them. I've written 12, 13 books. I don't know how many books I've written. It's 12 plus. I might be on my 13th or 14th. I can't remember. 5 of those books are one series. If my next book was to get published, that would be my 7th or 8th, I'd say, original independent work. That would put me on a par with Brandon Sanderson, who I've mentioned earlier. He wrote, I think it was 7 or 8 before he got published. I think Stephen King, 4 or 5. And these are 2 of the best authors of all time. I do think that the longer you go without being published, And the longer you've got to stick at it, of course, you've got to keep writing and you've got to keep editing, you've got to keep reading, you've got to keep believing, you've got to change sometimes how you do things. And more of that later from me. But that's how you get better. That's how you become more dynamic. So I can see how some authors, they get published just a bit too soon. Like I said before, they don't quite know what to do. And again, I go back to just wonder if it'd just be better to choose the author over their work. How we would decide that, I don't know. Because, obviously, there's lots of writers out there who say, pick me, I'm doing all this stuff. Maybe I should write a short story or something about, some kind of parallel universe where, you know, you have to write $10 legally. You have to write $10 before you'll be considered to be published. What about that? Is that outrageous or crazy? That means Harry Potter doesn't get published until J.K. Rowling finishes it. But maybe it would ensure that the right kind of writers, the ones that are really committed to the cause, get to the end. No, of course I'm not really honestly proposing that. And B, even if I was, there's zero chance of that happening. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about recently. I want to talk now about my podcast, and I want to make a recommendation to anyone else out there that's doing podcasts. If you want your podcast to grow, my number one advice. Now listen, before we get on to some number one advice, my stats, just so you know what I'm talking about. Every episode of my podcast gets 60 to 70 downloads or streams. Again, it's probably more than most. But when we're talking about, Joe Rogan, that kind of stats, it's not even close. In terms of writing podcasts, I don't know. I think that's pretty respectable. I'd love it, obviously, a bit more if it was on 200 or 300 per episode. But the point I want to make is it's gone up from, 10 to 20, 5 to 10 in 4 or 5 months. So that's quite a growth rate. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got to keep it going. Now, for me, the reason why it's happened, the big reason, the number one reason, and I've done lots of things, number one is getting guests on my show. It's a risk. Every time I do one, every time I set up one, I'm risking failure. How can I fail? It doesn't work. There's a problem with the audio, there's a problem with the video. I've done podcasts where at the end of every episode, in fact, there was 2 episodes back to back, I had some huge issues to solve, and I mostly solved both of them. And there's a lot of work goes into it, but I have to be willing, to take that risk to get guests on. But guests have really helped me sell my show. They get me in touch with other writers, obviously on things like Instagram and Threads. And then again, I can then contact them and get them involved. Again, the more guests you get on your show, it leads to more growth. What happens then is, you meet new writers. Hey, do you want to come on my show? Yeah. It's most of the time. Most people want to come on the show. And so again, that helps me grow my audience. And I think anyone out there doing podcasts, I would really recommend that. I know sometimes it's easy to think, no one likes history, or no one likes ghosts, no one likes sewing. There's lots of people out there, and you've just got to reach out. Even, I've got guests on my show by not actually contacting them. I've just put a message out on Threads, which I've done a couple of times. I'd love to speak to people, agents and people involved in the publishing industry. This is an open request to any agents or people in the publishing industry. Because obviously, myself and other writers, we tend to be more unpublished, but I have had, a couple of published authors on here. We tend to be unpublished. And so our knowledge of literary agents and publishing companies tends to be from the other side of the fence. And occasionally we get a sneak peek in, or we see something on Instagram, we think we know a bit more. And I think it would be great to hear from people to tell us your side of the story. And don't worry, if you come on, I'm not going to be, oh my God, I disagree with you. One of my standpoints for this podcast is I'm here to listen. It's all about you. I'm listening. I'll do my best. I write down some ideas as you're talking, and I'll try to get you to explain yourself. But I won't be like completely disagree with you or that's outrageous. Nothing like that. I think it's just great. It would be great to hear your side of the story. Yeah. So back to the podcast. Yeah, get some guests on. I think the next point I would make is this: set up some groups. Could be on Facebook. People often recommend collecting email addresses. Personally, I think that's a bit passe. I think it's kind of had its sell by date. I'm in one circular for Scottish wildlife. Do you know how many times I've actually opened it and read it? 0 in 3 or 4 years. I think these days it's far better to do things like on Instagram, Threads, set up a Facebook page, and just let people know. You just got to make sure you update it regularly. Well, how do you get people involved? Sometimes you can just go, an open news on Facebook or whatever you and say, does anybody want to join this group? You'll be surprised. You'll get a few people, and you'll get people on there that you don't think, are you interested in writing? I didn't know you like writing, but they do, or they find it interesting. Maybe they find you interesting, and that's what you can do. But then beyond that, I go on things like Instagram Threads. I will add people that especially, listen, as a writer for Instagram, I typically add other writers. As soon as they add me back, I send them a message and I ask them politely, would you like to join this group? Tell them what it's about. If they don't want to, honestly, 99% of the time, they just don't respond. And that's okay by me. So if you're listening to this and you're one of those people, I don't get offended. I think it's probably the easiest way. It saves me time even just reply back and say, yeah, no worries. I can just focus on those people that do want to get involved in the groups. And to everybody else out there, I do recommend you do send a personal a personal message first, just asking, because otherwise, obviously, people might get offended. You've put them into a group that they've not wanted or not wanted to join. But I think as well, I think it shows that you're nice and you're being civil and you're being humane. And it shows a little bit about yourself, like I said. And it makes them, I think, first of all, more eager to stay in the group. But, the idea of setting up the group is that when you put your podcast in there, they actually take the trouble to listen to it. And I think they're more likely to do that if you ask them to be in there. You've shown a little bit of your personality, which at the moment we'll presume is really nice and not crazy or anything like that. So I do recommend those things. I think another one is when you do your interviews, and this is something I'm working on right now. This is not something that I've mastered, and I won't claim to have mastered it. And it's something that the last few weeks I've really started to think about and put into practice. The interview it's at the end of the day, it's IP. It's your IP. Okay, you can always share it with your guests, no problem. They're free to download it as well. But that record is yours. And what I say to you is don't just do a podcast and leave it there and people download it, share it, whatever. Use that transcript. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment, I'm writing up the interviews. I've done one with Curtis Chin. That's been uploaded. And I'm doing another one now with Sarah James. And what I'm doing is I'm using what's called the embedded interview format. What that means is I summarize what the person said, or should I say, the main things they've said, because I can't include everything. Typically, I'm looking for 2 A4 pages, give or take. So for Curtis Chin, I think it was dead on 2 pages. Sarah James's, which I've not edited to be fair, might be a bit above that. But again, I might edit it down, I might cut a few things out. And so, yeah, the embedded format, what you do is you summarize what they say, but then you also include a few key quotes. And I'm trying to get the tone right as well. And so I'm using that. And again, at the bottom, there's another link to the podcast. Just trying to find new ways to keep episodes live, as it were, long after they've been uploaded. I think that's, unless your name's Joe Rogan, most people are not going to listen to what's old. It's just the way it is, rightly or wrongly. Social media, the internet tends to be pretty instantaneous. What's happening now is what's important. What happened yesterday, and of course I'm exaggerating a little bit here, what happened yesterday is not. And so I think you've got to keep reinforcing it to the audience that this stuff has happened. It might be that people are aware of it, but they never got around to it. Maybe they did download it, but they didn't listen to it. Something like that. So that's something I'm doing at the moment. I think it's working. I got, as I said, quite a few downloads yesterday, which is not bad. Always good. In fact, I find these days my days of zero downloads on a given day aren't happening anymore, and that's really good. I just have to constantly commit to it and constantly, be thinking about content every day. Another thing I do is, for example, on this app is called Riverside, and when I finished uploading it, what it does is it creates some magic clips, highlights basically, that can be shared on social media. Now, it's not always perfect. You do have to sift through them and find what's best. But I really recommend that you share these on whatever social media sites you use. So I share them on Instagram. Why? I just feel that again, and you can put a link to the podcast episode. It gets people downloading. When I've put one of these videos up there, I've typically noticed that that episode gets 2 or 3 downloads that day. And again, that might be, it doesn't sound like much. It's more than nothing. And that's on top of other episodes that are also being downloaded. So again, I think you have to find ways to publicize things. I have got like some very, very, very vague ideas about maybe setting up a website. A bit like, if anyone out there is used to or aware of, called Humans of New York. It's about this guy, Brandon Stanton, and he goes around New York and other places in the world, but principally New York. And he takes photos of people and then he gets their story. So, of course, for me, and it's really good, it's very photography based, and he's got a group up on a page on Facebook, as have I. I think he might have it on Instagram. I can't remember. I'm not sure if he does have it on Instagram, but I need to check on that. And so my idea is to have something similar like that. I think what I want to do first is get it on Facebook a bit more. Or another thing I do is I have a blog that's called All About Writing. And again, I put this interview on there. And again, at the bottom, there's a link. And so I'm trying to get photos now, a bit like Humans of New York, to kind of, how do you want to say it? Highlight things, sex it up, make it look more appealing. Again, it's a work in progress, but again, I think that you have to see your podcast as more than, you know, just something you do every week. It's you always have to be thinking about what to do, how to do it, that kind of thing. I don't think there's anything else I would recommend. I think you have to always try to promote it, but you always have to be willing to go back and look at aspects of your podcast or your episodes and change them. So for me, I'm looking at my podcast titles right now. But what I'm doing is, when I upload, for example, this episode just be called Flying Solo. But when I interview writers, I just put, with, for example, David Pariseau or with Curtis Chin. That's what I do. And because of that, what I then do is, a moment where I lost my chain of thought, but luckily I can cut this out. What was I talking about? Because I have time now. It's okay. No, no, no. It's just me. So I'm only doing it for another 20 minutes. I'm just trying to think. You just disturbed me. I'm like, what was I talking about? But I can cut this. It's not a problem. Um, what was I talking about? Good job we're not YouTube live, innit? I was on about I was on about the things on about the work in progress, doing the Instagram posts. Yeah, so another thing I'm actually thinking about doing is on Instagram, you can have like carousel posts. I've done one the other day. It was more of an experiment. It was about my 2026 writing resolutions. Um, and what I'm thinking about doing is having like maybe putting the interview down onto like carousel posts. And like, again, I've done like a summary of the interview, but maybe I'll have a summary of a summary again with the pictures that the writers are giving to me. Right now, this idea just exists in my head. I'm not too sure. A bit like my idea for, my website. We'll just see. I think it's a great idea, but I don't want to pay maybe I don't know, a couple of $100 for a website every year if it's not necessary. I think I'm going to explore Facebook a bit first. So I think, like I say, I think with back to episode titles, I think at the moment I'm doing, like I say, with David Parasol, with Curtis Chin. And so what I want to do is when I do the interview, when I write the interview and put it on my blog, I'm changing the title. Now you might say, well, why don't you do that in the first place? And that's a really good point. But I've realized it gives me a crucial advantage. It allows me to promote my episode twice. Now you could say I could do that anyway, but you don't. You kind of don't feel the urge, or you are afraid, genuinely, of people. Wait, show this again. But when you change the title, it's different. It's almost like a different episode. But I think as well, you're showing people, hey, I'm making an attempt here. I'm doing something different. I'm doing something new. So there is that. I think you have to have that commitment to the content. Look, don't get me wrong. You could go on my, podcast now and go, I've seen this is wrong. Yeah, probably. I mean, a good example is, for my podcast, I've put my book cover as like what do I call the screenshot of the photo, where it's called. I need to change that. I haven't changed it. Why not? I don't know what to change it to. I'm waiting for the idea to come to me. Who knows? Maybe I'll dream about it and wake up, and that's it. I think what I don't like about it right now is it's obviously all about Jack Strong, which is the greatest poet you never read. No, I'm joking. It's okay, I suppose. Maybe more than okay. But I'd like it, like I said, I want it to be about you guys, especially the people that come on my show. So I've got to think of a bit more of a humble way of doing it. I don't know right now. If it was a bigger picture, I might try to have like an amalgamation of, all the different writers that have come on my show, but it isn't. So I'm not quite sure what is the best solution for that, but we'll see. Okay, let's move on to another topic. I want to discuss briefly show and tell. I've seen a few posts coming up on Instagram, saying, obviously one of the rules of fiction is show not tell, and lately it's become kind of cool to say don't. It's okay to tell. Now I'm not saying those people are wrong, because they're not. No rule is 100% perfect. It's just not. I've always, there's a rule that adverbs don't have adverbs. I don't agree with that at all. Why don't I agree with that? We have adverbs in the English language for a reason. It's just that for writing, you cut most of them out. But you've always got to occasionally leave some in, because the reader just wouldn't know without it if the cut was put down carefully. If he was, breathing breathlessly, for example, something like that. So yeah, going back to the other thing I was talking. show not tell. What I would say is, I think show not tell, like a lot of rules, it's great. It's for reference only. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. For me, when I'm writing, I try to show not tell every time. And again, I bet there's a bunch of people out there. You can get my book, open it. You're telling here. Yeah, I think everybody tells at some point. It has to happen. But I think it's a great kind of yardstick to go by to get into the habit of trying to show. I'm always worried when I hear published authors say telling is fine. Newbie authors hear that and go, it's okay. I don't need to show. Those people over there that were telling me that, I need to show more and I'm telling too much, they're wrong. They're wrong because this famous published writer is telling me so. I think, honestly, in those situations, the writer is actually wrong. I've seen a few on Instagram recently where the degree of telling was just huge. Just remember that the readers out there, not only are they educated, they're readers. They've read many books in their lives. They have the intelligence to, work things out on their own. So you've got to give them a bit of credit. You don't have to say things like, I don't know, if you're going to say something like there's no dragons left alive, the idea would be it's not true, it's the opposite. The reader loves stuff like that. Loves stuff like that. But if you expressly tell them everything about scene, and so there's nothing for them to do, or they're thinking, are there wolves left here? And you tell them there aren't. It probably depends on, how you do it as well. That's another thing. I tend to think when you're telling, you've got to use good language as well. One of my go-tos, by the way, if I need to tell something, I do it in dialogue. That's my go-to every time. And get the. It's not just about telling it in dialogue. Guess what? The characters get to discuss it, and it's just a bit more interesting. And if they're talking about something dramatic, they react to it. I think it's more normal that way. So yeah. Moving on. I want to say a little bit about this. It's something I've noticed on Threads and Instagram in particular. I'm sure it happens on Twitter X. I'm not on Twitter X. I got kicked off a while back. Too left wing, man. No, nothing like that. I was hacked, and this was after Elon Musk took over, and he fired like everybody that probably could solve my problem. And like all my posts went from talking about writing and Liverpool Football Club to cryptocurrency. And I'm trying to tell them, hey, I've been hacked. This is not me, and it just wouldn't help. So I've tried to get back on since for different accounts, but I find it's become a very cumbersome, bit of technology. Maybe there's something suspicious about my account. I don't know, but they're always asking for phone numbers, and it's complicated because I think when I set up one account, I'd put my dad's UK phone number. I'm in China. I've got a Chinese phone. There's all these complications. And I'm like, you know what? I criticised Amazon a while back. Amazon now do Face ID. So if I go into my Amazon account, it just scans my face. I don't know. No one should be putting in phone numbers and the like into, Twitter, X, Facebook and stuff. It's boring. I don't have the time. Does anyone have the time? I don't. I just want to one click. It's like when you want to edit your podcast, you don't spend your time, I'm going to cut this. I want to do this. I want to do that. A lot of it is supposed to be done by just pressing one button. Now, sometimes it's not always like that, unfortunately. I've had times where I've had to make many, many changes in order to make sure that the episode is in the best possible condition for the listeners, and it can be frustrating. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, there's a lot of work that goes into these podcasts behind the scenes. So listen, maybe there's some days where I'm not doing anything or just chuck out the odd message on Instagram. But then there's other times where I have to really edit episodes, or I've got to. I'm recording this on an app called Riverside, and I had a problem actually with Curtis Chin's episode. I can't remember what the problem was now. I think he disappeared or something like that. Anyway, so I had to contact the app, and it took me a whole day to get it sorted. And in the end, it was rather mundane. The solution was just because there'd been an update, and I'd updated it, but I hadn't restarted my phone. It didn't prompt me, but I didn't restart my phone. That's all I had to do, and everything was fine. But I had to do lots of things. I had to be on this like AI app, and then I had to be speaking to different, customer service agents and stuff. So there's a lot of work goes into it. So I do appreciate it if you do go out and download. Now, the point I was going to make is I've noticed there's a trend on. Maybe it's just me. But I don't think it is other people happens to writers not following writers when they've been added. I'm not angry about it. I'm actually bemused and mystified. I find it a bit perplexing. If another writer adds me, yeah, great. I'm going to add you back. I tend to be very wary of those people that are obviously trying to sell something that, like editing, for example, promotion sites. I don't tend to. I don't want. Listen, fair dues. You've got your own jobs and stuff. I get that, but I'm trying to get writers into these groups to help promote my podcasts and blogs and all this different kind of stuff. And I don't want someone in there that's gonna ruin things a bit and try to sell things. That would be my big, because guess what? I might lose 5 or 6 people. That might be 5 or 6 downloads. It's really not worth it. But by and large, I add everybody back, and I've noticed happens on Instagram, adding people not being added back, especially when it's other content creators. And I'm a bit bemused. I think there's a basic human decency. Just add people back. I don't think it takes much effort, or if you're watching someone else's content, isn't that great? You get to learn things. When I follow other writers, particularly those that are doing the videoing themselves and talking about it, particularly those that are doing the carousel posts. If you're not sure what those are, it's where there's like, it's not just one picture. They put maybe, for example, 5 or 6 pictures, and on it will be text, and they're telling a story or they're giving a series of opinions over 5 or 6 photos. And it's a very engaging way of showcasing yourself and or your art, whatever your art may be. And I've learned a ton from seeing other people do that, and it's allowed me to get better and consider different ways of doing things. So if you're not following other people back, you're not getting that. You're in your own little island. I was talking earlier about writers not being successful, indie authors not being successful, even traditional authors. If you're selling a few thousand books a year, I'm not sure that's going to cut it for lasting, as I'm saying. I think everybody needs an audience, and I think you cannot afford to not add someone back. I'll be honest, if someone adds me back, if someone's in my Facebook, my Instagram and Threads groups, wow, fantastic. You're posting something. People that are listening to this, you know I do this. I share it. I comment. I get more involved, and I'm a customer. I'm a potential customer at the very least. And if you don't add me, it's not that I won't do that. I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter like a lemon. But to be honest, over time, I'm less likely to engage. I remember there was this American poet. I think she was American. I'm pretty sure she's American. And I like one of her poems. And I click follow. And I checked a few days. She's not following me back. I mean, her posts they're not being liked by 2,000 people. There's a few. I don't know how. And I'm sure she's a nice person, really, but I just think there's an etiquette side of it. I think we have to be, kinder to each other and more understanding and appreciative of each other. But yeah, but there's that practicality side to things for me. People are more to engage, and I mentioned this American poet. I'll be honest, she's on my Instagram. I skip past, and that's not me being bitter. Do you know what I think? It's like in my mind when I see it, I'm immediately conscious of her not following me back, and I think, why should I take time on you? Why should I like your poem? And listen, the poem's okay. It's not. I'm not going to say, "Oh, it's terrible." It's not. I'm not going to say that. Her first few poems I really liked, actually, and they were really good. But I just think it's that aspect. I think as writers we have to showcase our personality and show people that we care. We're decent human beings. If we don't do that, isn't there? There's an aspect of like it's almost like we're being gods. It's like worship. We want people to follow us, but we are not willing to follow others. I think certainly with the indie publishing community, I think it's absolutely crazy. We don't get enough people buying our books as it is. We don't get enough credit from mainstream publishing. Indie publishing is one of the phenomenons of our time. It's a huge, huge development, and it is. I think it's something that I think the mainstream media, mainstream book publishing companies, I think should take more of a what's what I'm looking for, more of an interest in really. Like for example, like fan channels for like sport. The mainstream like TV shows, they took that to heart. Maybe at times they copied it, but they also would invite people from those channels to come on their show. A really good, Arsenal Fan TV is a great example. But with publishing, you get the odd author. I think Andy Weir came from indie publishing. You get the odd author, it's plucked out, but there's no like imprints like that are just for like indie publishing. Wouldn't it be great if Penguin had like a series of books that were only for like maybe the best-selling indie books out there, or editors went looking around looking for talent. And when I say that, I'm imagining other people. I'm not thinking about myself. I'm trying to be humble. I'm thinking of other people. I just think that at times it's easy to think at times that indie publishing is rubbish. I know some people say that. You know what? If you read an indie book, you're more likely to find spelling mistakes or typos and a bad book cover, or sorry, bad's too strong a word, or should we say unprofessional or not ideal book cover compared to a traditionally published book. But guess what? The traditionally published author, they've got so many resources behind them. They've got departments. More than just an agent, more than just an editor. They have departments behind them. And I think sometimes we have to remember that the traditionally published author, and that would include me if I was to get published, they get a lot of assistance from other people. I think sometimes when we're reading, we should be a bit more forgiving of indie publishers. I read at times, traditionally published, at times, I read a lot of traditionally published work. I see, passages that could be written better. I don't mean typos. I mean, like, maybe they are telling too much. Maybe this is not interesting. Maybe there's just too much dialogue. Maybe there's not enough. So the idea that, traditionally published authors as a whole are all one step above indie publishers, I'm not too sure I agree with that. I think that's probably, I bet if you take any indie published author, we'll assume they're a decent human being. We'll assume that they're willing to work with others. Okay, so anyone that's like, no, I'm amazing, I'm not going to change, forget those. Anyone that's willing to work with others, I bet that publishing department and that literary agent will make them just as successful as the traditionally published authors. It feels like, that movie Trading Places, if you remember that, with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. Maybe someone should do that and test this theory. But yeah, I do think they need to be given more of a shot. But guess what? Going back to my original point, if you're an indie author and someone's adding you and you're not adding them back, you're taking a gun and you're shooting yourself in the foot. What are you doing? The more the merrier. We need to be a community. That's the only way we're going to do it. We have to be a community of people. I think, think about indie authors. If we all bought each other's books, a lot of us would be a lot more successful, a lot more famous. But we don't. We don't. We're not going to buy each other's books if we won't even return a follow. It's crazy. And maybe to a degree as well. One of the reasons why I started my podcast was kind of to overcome this. And I want to listen to what other people are doing out there. Sometimes I buy their books. I can't buy them every week. It costs too much money. And more than that, as well as costing too much money, I don't have the time. I can't read a book a week. I can't be sure that I could read a book a week, particularly when I'm working, writing, and I've got work to do on the podcast. So if you do appear on my show and I'm like, I don't buy your book, it's not a reflection of your writing. It's just the way it is. I just don't have the time, and I don't have the money really. The podcast does cost, I want to say, a fair bit. It's probably about £20, £25 every month. But if I was buying everybody's books that appeared on my show, and ideally, I'd like to get 4 or 5 authors a month. Ideally, it's not always possible, as you can see for now. But that what is that? That could easily be £15, £20. There's no way. Not with all the work that goes on in the back as well. It's just not possible. But I will buy occasional 1 or 2. And one thing I've done as well, like for example with Curtis Chin, I got his book. I've not read it yet. I'm going to read it on holiday. But I bought it for my dad for his birthday, and it's something I'd like to do. And another thing I'd like to do is occasionally I will buy books, and if I like them, there's a birthday coming up, I'm going to buy them and get other people to have them. I think that's a great way of supporting each other. So I think if my podcast is successful, what I want is I would like published authors to come on the show because, wow, fantastic guys. Like Curtis Chin came on the show. Eric Jang, who was the first author on my show, both traditionally published authors. One's a memoirist, and the other one writes children's fiction. Fantastic, love it. And I've got another memoirist coming on the show. Not sure on the month yet because I've got a holiday coming up next month, which is going to throw a spanner in the works. But probably March, I've got another published author coming on. And it's just fantastic to hear from you and your side of the story. I've got to say. But one thing I want these people to come on my show. Listen, I'm not going to lie. They do help grow my audience. It is a really good sell. But I also want indie authors. And listen, if I became the next Joe Rogan, I don't think that's likely with a writing podcast, but there is another guy called David Perel, who's called the Writing Guy, and he does a different type of podcast. It's a writing podcast, but it's in a studio format. There's no way I can do that. I don't have those resources. I do not have that cash behind me that he clearly does, and I'm not, good for him. Well done. But there's no way I can do that. I will continue to do these type of online sessions. But just to say, if I was more famous, I will still do indie authors because that's where I've come from. And I do think that indie authors have a voice and they need to be heard, and they've got some very good books, and they've got some interesting ideas, and it's a big part of our culture, our community. So yeah, great. So if you're out there and you listen to this for the first time, if you want to join my podcast, just let me know. Now, at the moment, I think I'm backed up. I think I'm fairly sure I've got enough guests into March. So if you do, get in touch with me, it won't be, the next, week or two. It never is. But what I normally do is I get back to you with a few alternative dates and just say, hey, which one do you prefer? And we try to find a suitable time schedule. In fact, that's one of being the things. I thought that arranging the times would be one of the most difficult aspects of podcasting. It's been the easiest. I suggest every ride at the same time every time because it suits me, which is because I'm living in China, 10:30 p.m. China time because my kids gone to bed. That's the time when I can be reasonably sure that I can be in a quiet environment, and usually Wi-Fi is obviously better at night. I think less people are using it. So that's the idea of doing that, really. I think we can end there. I just want to say thank you again to all the people that tuned in and listened to me and support my show. It is definitely a work in progress. Trying my best. But yeah, just thank you from the bottom of my heart. Again, like I said before, if you want to join the show, let me know. I'll do my best to accommodate you. Like I said, I'm particularly eager to hear from certainly agents and publishers. Not sure if I'll get any. I detect from agents. I don't think they're interested. And if you're out there, you're an agent, and you are, oh, come, let me know. But just when I've engaged with agents on things like Threads and Instagram, I think they tend to think, well, if my name was Joe Rogan, they would be, but it's not. It's the opposite. And because of that, they've not got back in touch, and I'm not bitter. That's not the way I'm going to live my life. But it would be great to hear from some. Other than that, it was great when I was listening to talking to David Pariseau, and he was talking about sci-fi and fantasy. I loved it. Honestly, I could just sit back and listen. So if you're a sci-fi fantasy writer, I know a young adult. I've not had any young adult authors on yet, and I'm a young adult author, so it'd be great to talk about favorite books and what kind of things I like to write about. I've had a few poets on, but keep on coming. To be honest, I think that covers it really. Just get in touch. Okay, I think we can end there. Until next. Oh no! Before we finish, next week Travis Byram, who was on episode, I think it was episode 8, he'll be back on the show. As I've said before, the people that come on my show, I want them to be like long-term collaborators, and the idea I want guests to be recurring. Now, that might be 2 or 3 times a year, once a month. I don't know yet. It just depends on the people. Okay, so I think we can end things there. Have a great week. See you next week. Thank you very much for tuning in.